At an altitude of 30,000 feet over the Middle East, a top-secret military operation was underway. Several giant refueling aircraft, in the darkness, were flying in extremely tight formation. Their mission was singular: to refuel fighter jets flying deep into enemy territory. For the U.S. Air Force, these KC-135 refueling aircraft are like giant flying fuel depots, supporting entire airstrike operations. But in this seemingly peaceful night sky, a mid-air collision was silently approaching. Early morning on May 12, 2026, at Brian Airfield in Israel, a U.S. Air Force refueling aircraft was undergoing preparations on the military apron. This aircraft, tail number 3556, had been loaded with approximately 90 tons of aviation fuel, with all fuel tanks in its wings and fuselage filled. This is a KC-135 refueling aircraft, manufactured in 1962, belonging to the 459th Air Refueling Squadron, stationed at Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland. After decades of service, this aircraft has been modernized, with its engines replaced by CFM56 turbofan engines, and its avionics system improved. Thanks to these upgrades, it can carry nearly 90 tons of fuel, enough for aerial refueling for an entire squadron of fighter jets. The boom refueling probe on the tail can refuel F-16s, F-35 Lightning II, and B-52 Stratofortress. In over 60 years of service, the KC-135 has become the core of the U.S. Air Force's aerial refueling system, allowing it to project military power globally to almost every region. The mission of this aircraft that day was clear: as an aerial refueling station, to refuel the F-3526 participating in Operation Epic Road and the B-2 Spirit bomber, then withdraw from the combat zone and safely return to base. To complete this mission, this KC-135 would fly at an altitude of over 30,000 feet. And through the 8-meter refueling boom at the aircraft's tail, it could, while in flight, refuel high-speed fighter jets, thereby allowing the attack formation to fly further, stay longer, and even strike deep into enemy territory, at targets thousands of kilometers away. In other words, although it doesn't carry any bombs itself, it is the logistical lifeline of the entire aerial combat system. Normally, the KC-135's crew consists of 3 people: the captain, the co-pilot, and the boom operator responsible for operating the refueling boom. However, during this special mission, due to the unique nature of the operation, there were at least 6 U.S. military personnel on board. At 7:32 a.m. Israel time, KC-135, tail number 3556, after receiving takeoff clearance, began to taxi. The 150-ton fuselage accelerated down the runway, then slowly took off. After takeoff, the aircraft circled the airport following standard procedures to stabilize its altitude and adjust its flight status. After completing these preparations, the captain adjusted the flight path southeast, flying into the route leading to western Iraq. From this moment on, this aerial refueling station officially joined a top-secret combat mission. At 8:35 p.m. local time, this KC-135 was flying eastward over western Iraq, at an altitude of approximately 30,000 feet. Then, the captain received an uninterrupted call, requesting the aircraft to fly to refueling point Bob as per the mission plan. At 8:50 p.m., this KC-135 was on the holding pattern of the aerial refueling route, flying steadily, along with other refueling aircraft. It maintained a pre-established circular flight path, so that fighter jets could approach one by one and complete aerial refueling. Meanwhile, F/A-18 fighter jets circled tens of kilometers away, forming the outer aerial defense network. Further out, the EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft began emitting powerful electronic jamming signals. The complex and dense electromagnetic interference quickly flooded the entire airspace, disrupting the radar's detection capabilities in the area, while hiding the attack formation's true flight path. On the ground, the U.S. military's underground command center, along with military analysts, was monitoring via satellite, radar, and electronic reconnaissance systems. Real-time battlefield data. On the Iranian side, every slightest change in the radar spectrum was alarmingly recorded on the monitoring screens. And while the ground combat situation was continuously updated, the aerial refueling operation also officially began. An F-35 fighter jet reduced speed and approached from behind, maintaining a precise position beneath the KC-135's fuselage. A few seconds later, the experimental refueling boom at the tail of the KC-135 successfully connected with the F-35's refueling port. Fuel began to be transferred. Everything proceeded smoothly as planned. In the night sky over the Middle East, the entire formation operated like a precise machine. However, at this seemingly perfect moment, an unexpected incident was forming within the refueling aircraft formation. Behind KC-135 tail number 3556, another refueling aircraft was waiting to hold its position in the flight path. Under night flight conditions, these aircraft must maintain extremely high precision to ensure the continuity of the refueling pace. And in such a formation, even a tiny deviation can quickly turn into danger. It seemed that as the formation made its turn to maintain the circular flight path, the trailing refueling aircraft was at cruising altitude, deviating from its standard position by just a few meters. But in such a tight formation, this error of a few meters was enough to break the safety distance. The collision almost happened in an instant. The trailing aircraft with its metal structure most likely cut into the tail section of aircraft 3556. That was precisely the location of the vertical stabilizer and the rudder. For a large aircraft like the KC-135, these structures are key to maintaining directional stability. Once the tail section is damaged, the aircraft almost immediately loses directional control. The crew in the cockpit immediately tried to regain control of the aircraft. But everything happened too fast. At this moment, this KC-135 was still carrying tens of tons of aviation fuel, distributed in the fuel tanks in its wings and fuselage. The enormous weight meant that in the event of aerodynamic structural damage, the aircraft became extremely difficult to control. Just a few seconds later, this KC-135 with tail number 3556 had completely lost control and began to fall. At an altitude of over 30,000 feet, this aircraft tilted violently, spinning wildly in the air. The crew had almost no chance of escape. Aerial refueling aircraft like the KC-135 are not designed with a complete emergency escape system for the entire crew, especially in such sudden accidents. When an accident occurs instantly at cruising altitude, a massive aircraft loses control in just a few seconds. The reaction time for the crew is almost zero. This aerial refueling station, originally carrying tens of tons of fuel, has now turned into a massive, out-of-control chunk of metal falling. It plunged straight down from 30,000 feet, heading towards Iraq's Sib Desert. A few seconds later, a massive explosion tore through the night. After the accident occurred, the remaining KC-135 from the collision immediately sent out an emergency signal. After quickly escaping the dangerous airspace, this aircraft diverted its flight path towards the sea. Then, at Brian Airport in Israel, it made a successful emergency landing on the KC-135 with tail number 3556. All 6 crew members perished. When photos of the surviving KC-135 were released, aviation experts discovered that most of the vertical stabilizer's structure had been completely torn off. This indicated an extremely powerful impact. At the same time, many speculations began to spread online. Some people suggested that the two aircraft might have collided during aerial refueling. A collision occurred. But from a technical perspective, this claim is almost impossible to be true. The KC-1352 model does not have aerial refueling reception capability. It does not have a refueling port, but can only refuel other aircraft, and cannot receive fuel in flight. Only a special type of KC-1352T has the aerial refueling reception function. But currently worldwide, very few aircraft have undergone this modification, and the 2 aircraft in this accident do not belong to this type. Aside from this debunked speculation, aviation experts mainly focus on 2 possibilities. The first possibility concerns the flight environment in a war zone at night. In such missions, refueling aircraft often need to fly in extremely tight formations to maintain continuous aerial refueling. At the same time, to reduce the chance of being detected by enemy radar, aircraft may enter an electromagnetic silent state, minimizing radio communication, and not using active radar to reduce identification signals. In such an environment, the distance between aircraft relies heavily on flight equipment, as well as the pilot's spatial awareness. When multiple large aircraft fly at night in narrow airspace, even an extremely small deviation in position or flight direction can break the safe distance. In extreme cases, this deviation is enough to lead to an in-formation mid-air collision. The second hypothesis is the involvement of Iran-backed proxy forces. After the incident occurred, there was speculation that Iranian armed forces might have launched a surface-to-air missile, shooting down one of the aircraft. But this claim was quickly refuted. U.S. Central Command later issued a statement, stating that this accident was not caused by enemy fire, nor were there any indications of hostile forces being involved. With such official statements, and given the severely damaged condition of the remaining aircraft's tail, most people currently tend to believe that this accident most likely originated from two mid-air refueling aircraft colliding or an operational accident. Often, the cause behind such serious aviation accidents is not necessarily a complex military attack or an elaborate conspiracy, but often just an extremely small deviation, whether a data error or a human judgment error, occurring at the most critical moment.